Snow drifted down in silence, soft as ash from a fire long dead. The lamps along Dry Creek's single street glowed through the storm like faraway stars, their halos bending through the wind. Marietta Cole stood at the edge of that yellow light, her breath curling into ghosts. Her gloved hands clutched the edges of her worn blue cloak, the same one she'd once worn to a Christmas dance when her name still meant something. Tonight, it hung heavy on her shoulders, weighted by months of whispers she could not outrun. Inside the saloon, music thumped faintly. The fiddle, the boots, the glassy laughter of women who'd learned how to smile even when it hurt. Marietta stared at their shadows moving across the frosted windows. For a moment she imagined she was one of them again, turning beneath the chandeliers, cheeks flushed with wine and youth. Then the laughter broke into a sharp chorus of gossip that reached even through the glass. She came alone again. That's what happens when you chase your luck too far. Poor thing, still waiting on that scoundrel from Carson. Her throat burned. She turned from the window, snow seaming the hem of her skirt, her boots already soaked through. The sky was a color between pewter and despair. Every snowflake that touched her cheek felt like the town reminding her she was not welcome here. Not after the ring had vanished, not after her fiancé had gone west without a word, not after she'd been seen waiting at the depot 3 nights in a row, still believing he'd return. The women pitied her, the men mocked her, the sheriff called it a lesson in decency. She'd tried to leave once, packed her things and walked until her legs gave out. But the storm drove her back, and so did something smaller. The stubborn hope that maybe this town would remember she'd once belonged to it. Tonight, though, she no longer hoped for forgiveness. She only wanted to be seen, if only for a heartbeat. The saloon doors swung open behind her, spilling warmth and music into the night. A man stepped out, broad and well-fed, his silver waistcoat straining at the buttons. Her ex-fiancé. He didn't notice her until she spoke, quietly. "Ethan." He froze, his grin faltering. "Marietta. You still here?" "I live here," she said, and even she could hear the smallness of her voice. He chuckled awkwardly, glancing at the 2 men behind him. "Didn't mean it that way. Just thought you might have gone back east." "I tried." "Well." He adjusted his gloves. "Best you do. Ain't right to linger where things didn't work out." "Where you didn't work out," she corrected. The laughter from inside leaked through the doorway again, and for a moment her eyes filled with tears that froze before they could fall. Ethan tipped his hat and walked into the storm, his boots crunching over the ice, leaving her alone with the music fading behind her. A gust of wind tugged her shawl aside. She turned toward the end of the street, where the land sloped down toward the frozen creek. A figure was approaching through the snow, tall, slow, deliberate. The lamps caught on his shoulders, bare save for a thick fur draped over one side. His hair was black and wet with flakes, his breath curling from between lips set in calm defiance of the cold. The townsfolk called him many things: half-breed, savage, the man from the ridge, but never by his real name. Marietta knew it. Talon Greyhawk. He walked as though the night belonged to him. The crowd inside noticed. Faces turned toward the window, and the piano faltered mid-note. No one dared speak. He passed the horses tethered outside, and even they seemed to still. His eyes lifted once, meeting hers. There was no pity there, only something deep and still, like the river under ice. Marietta's heart thudded. Shame and gratitude tangled inside her chest. He didn't stop walking until he stood a few paces away. His voice when he spoke was low and even. "You shouldn't be out in this. I had nowhere else to be." He nodded, as though he understood that too well. For a moment, neither spoke. Behind them, laughter broke again from the saloon, rough and mean. One of the men said loud enough to be heard, "Look there, the town flower's talking to the savage." Marietta flinched. Something inside her cracked, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She turned toward Talon. Her voice trembled. "Would you pretend to be my date? Just for tonight?" He blinked once. The snow gathered on his lashes, glinting in the lamplight. His gaze traveled over her torn gloves, her shaking hands, the brave tilt of her chin despite it all. "Pretend? Yes. If they think I came with someone, Maybe they'll stop. He studied her for a long breath, the kind that made time stretch thin. Then he nodded once. If it gives you peace. When he offered his arm, she hesitated only a moment before taking it. His skin was warm even in the storm. Together, they turned toward the saloon. The music inside had gone quiet. Only the crackle of the fire filled the silence as the doors swung open. Every head lifted. They stepped in. The floorboards groaned under his weight. Men's hands drifted toward their belts but stopped when the sheriff, seated near the fire, lifted his palm. "Easy, boys," he said, eyes narrowing. "Let's see what this is." Marietta kept her chin high. The smell of whiskey and pine smoke hit her, and for a heartbeat, she felt 16 again. Back when she believed nights like this could save her. She walked beside Talon to the bar, their steps steady, deliberate. He didn't touch her, but his presence was an anchor. The barkeep, an older woman named Agnes Weller, stared between them with something like pity. "Evenin', Miss Cole." "Mr. Greyhawk." Marietta's voice barely carried. "Evening. Didn't think you'd come to the dance." "I changed my mind." She smiled faintly. "Wanted to dance one last time before the year ends." Agnes hesitated, then poured 2 cups of coffee instead of whiskey, and slid them across the counter. "Then dance," she said softly. The piano player shifted uneasily but began again. Slow, hesitant notes that found courage as the moments passed. Talon turned toward Marietta, silent as ever, and extended his hand. For a second, she thought she couldn't do it, that she'd crumble under the stares, the mockery. But something in his gaze steadied her. She set her hand in his, trembling. The room hushed. The sheriff leaned back, his boots on the table. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered. The music grew stronger, warmer. Talon moved with unexpected grace, leading her gently, his palm firm against her back. Around them, conversation returned in scattered bursts, some cruel, some odd. The snow beyond the windows whirled harder, as if to hide them from the world. For the first time in months, Marietta laughed. Not loudly, just a small breath of disbelief. "They're staring," she whispered. "Let them," he murmured. When the song ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than judgment. It felt like peace. The sheriff's expression softened almost imperceptibly before he looked away. Someone clapped once, awkwardly. The moment passed, but its warmth lingered. Outside, the storm deepened. Talon helped her into her cloak again, his fingers brushing her shoulder, a touch both protective and respectful. "You want me to walk you home?" "I live near the church." He nodded. "Then near enough." They stepped back into the snow. The saloon's light faded behind them, swallowed by white. Neither spoke as they walked past the silent houses. The sound of their boots, his deep, hers light, wove through the wind like a promise neither meant to make. At her gate, she turned to face him. His hair was dusted with frost, his eyes unreadable. "Thank you," she said softly, "for pretending." He gave the faintest smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes but changed his whole face. "Didn't feel like pretending." She wanted to reply, but the words caught in her throat. A gust of snow blew between them, and when it passed, he was already walking away, his figure fading into the storm. Marietta stood alone, her heart aching in a new, unfamiliar way. Not from shame this time, but from something gentler, more dangerous. She looked toward the saloon, where laughter had returned, and then to the path he'd taken. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and that, she realized, could be its own kind of scandal. The wind carried her breath away as she whispered to the night. "What have I done?" From far off, faintly, the sound of hoofbeats answered. Steady, certain, as if the storm itself had heard her and decided the story wasn't done yet. Snow whispered against the saloon windows like paper secrets, faint and constant. Inside, the air was thick with wood smoke, whiskey, and the uneasy silence that follows a scandal no one dares name. Marietta sat at a small table near the stove, her fingers wrapped around a tin cup of coffee gone cold. Across from her, Talon sat motionless, elbows on his knees, gaze steady on the fire. Neither spoke, but between them lingered something that felt like safety. Fragile, borrowed, but real. When Agnes Weller came by to refill their cups, she lingered longer than needed. "Cold out tonight," she murmured, avoiding Marietta's eyes. "Suppose it's good to have someone to walk you home." Marietta nodded. Her voice caught before it could form words. Agnes meant well, but the pity still burned. The barkeep moved away, whispering to another woman near the piano. The gossip spread quiet as smoke. No one dared laugh now, not while Talon sat there like a living storm, his calm too solid to provoke. The fiddle struck up again, hesitant, almost apologetic. A few couples resumed dancing, skirts turning under the amber lamps. Talon's gaze flicked to the floor, then to Marietta's face. "You wanted to dance," he said softly, as if it were a fact, not a question. Her breath caught. "I did. Once. Still do." She managed a small smile that hurt to hold. "It's not the same anymore." He rose slowly, the chair creaking beneath his height. When he extended his hand, the gesture was careful, as though offering her back a part of herself. "Then make it different." She hesitated. Every eye in the saloon was already on them, but something in his voice, low and without pride, steadied her shaking heart. She set her cup aside and placed her hand in his. His palm was rough, his skin warm even in the drafty room. Together they stepped into the open space by the stove, and the music softened as if bowing to them. They moved awkwardly at first, her small steps searching for rhythm, his large frame bending slightly so she wouldn't stumble. The scent of pine resin from the fire mixed with snow melting on his skin. When her gaze met his, time slowed. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of the town lift, replaced by something lighter. The quiet miracle of being seen without judgment. The sheriff leaned in his chair, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Ain't right," he muttered to no one. But no one answered. Even the cruelest among them seemed uncertain now, caught between prejudice and a strange reverence for the man who made shame look dignified. The song ended, yet they kept moving a few beats longer. When Marietta stepped back, her eyes shimmered. "You're not much for pretending, are you?" Talon tilted his head. "Pretend long enough, it becomes truth." His words lingered. She didn't know if he meant the dance, the night, or something deeper neither dared name. They sat again, closer this time, the fire reflecting in his dark eyes. Outside, snow fell heavier, muting the world. Inside, warmth gathered between them like a fragile truce. He spoke first. "You don't owe them anything." "They think I do." "Then let them think." She stared at him, bewildered by how simple he made it sound. "You've lived with their stares your whole life, haven't you?" He gave a slow nod. "They look, they whisper, then they go home. The river keeps running either way." Marietta looked down, her lashes catching the glow of the firelight. "I wish I had your peace." He studied her for a long moment. "Peace isn't given. It's built." His words sank deep. She wanted to ask how, but he had already turned back to the fire, lost in some memory the flames reflected. The door swung open with a crack of cold. Sheriff Wade strode in, brushing snow off his coat. His eyes landed on them instantly. "Evenin', Miss Cole." "Greyhawk." Talon didn't move. The sheriff's voice carried that lazy cruelty that always followed his authority. "Didn't expect to see you two so cozy. Town's talkin' already." Marietta's pulse jumped. "We've done nothing wrong." "Maybe not." He smirked. "But sometimes that's not the point." Talon's voice was quiet but firm. "Leave her be." Wade laughed, though the sound wavered. "Careful, Apache. Wouldn't want to make this into something it ain't." The room tensed. The fire popped, loud in the silence. Talon rose, slow and deliberate. Even without anger, his presence filled the room like thunder before rain. He looked down at Wade, calm as stone. "You've already made it that." For a moment, no one breathed. Then the sheriff stepped back, muttering, "This ain't over," and left with the wind slamming the door behind him. When the tension broke, Marietta exhaled shakily. "You shouldn't have." He turned toward her, eyes soft again. "You asked me to pretend." "Yes." "Then let me." The words disarmed her. She looked down, realizing her hand had clenched around the edge of the table. Slowly, she relaxed her grip. The piano resumed, softer now, a lullaby against the storm. They stayed until the crowd thinned, until even Agnes closed her ledger and dimmed the lamps. When Marietta finally stood, she found Talon waiting at the door, his fur-lined coat open, shoulders glistening faintly from melted snow. Outside, the night had quieted. The world was white, empty, endless. He walked beside her without speaking, matching his pace to hers. Each step crunched softly, and her breath mingled with his in the freezing air. Halfway down the road, she spoke. "You don't have to walk me all the way." "I know." "Then why do you?" He looked at her, the snowlight reflecting in his eyes. "Because it's the kind of lie worth keeping." Her steps slowed. The wind tugged at her cloak. "You think this will change how they see me?" "No," he paused. "But it might change how you see yourself." The church bell rang once in the distance, the sound hollow and beautiful. She stopped at her gate. The snow on her lashes glittered like tiny stars. "You speak like someone who's lost everything." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I know what's worth finding." Something in her chest ached, old grief stirring beside new warmth. The snow thickened, cloaking the town in silence. "Tomorrow," she said, "they'll talk." "They will. And you'll regret this." He shook his head slowly. "Not if you stop regretting you." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Only breath, soft and visible, rising like confession. He turned to go, his heavy steps fading down the road. Marietta stood there long after he disappeared into the white. The wind bit her cheeks, but she didn't feel the cold. She looked toward the saloon where the last lamp flickered out, and the memory of his hand on hers pulsed faintly like a heartbeat she hadn't realized she'd lost. A distant sound broke the quiet, hoofbeats again, steady, unhurried. She couldn't tell if it was his horse, or just her heart echoing against the frozen air. Either way, she smiled faintly, whispering to the snow. "Then let's keep pretending." The wind swallowed her words, carrying them toward the hills where the dark river slept under ice, and where, unseen, a single light still burned in the cabin by its shore. The morning after the storm rose clean and brittle, the kind of cold that could cut the truth out of a person. The town of Dry Creek gleamed under its thin crust of ice, all sins momentarily hidden beneath the white. Marietta stood at her window, holding her shawl closed at her throat, watching the street awaken in slow motion. The blacksmith clearing his forge, children slipping on the frozen ruts, the sheriff's horse pawing frost outside the jailhouse. She could already feel it, the whispers gathering like crows. By the time she stepped outside, they had begun. "Did you hear?" murmured one woman at the well. "He walked her home." Another added, "And she let him." A third whispered what they all thought but would not say aloud, that the dance had not ended at the saloon door. Marietta walked past them without lowering her gaze, though her cheeks burned. Each word clung to her shawl like snowflakes that wouldn't melt. The sky was bright, a hard winter blue. Her boots cracked through the ice as she made her way to the bakery, the one place that sometimes forgot to judge her. But even there, the clerk hesitated before taking her coin, his fingers brushing hers as if contact might stain. She left the loaf behind, pride outweighing hunger. She wandered toward the river instead. The snow along the banks was unbroken, untouched, except for a trail of wide boot prints leading toward the pine ridge. She followed them without thinking, each step muffled by the frozen hush. Her heart beat faster, not from fear but from the strange need to see him again, to know if last night had been a mercy or a mistake. The river's edge appeared suddenly, a winding ribbon of dark water refusing to freeze. Smoke rose from a small cabin set back among the trees. She saw him before he saw her. Talon, splitting wood with steady rhythm, each swing clean and deliberate. His bare forearms glistened with frost. For a moment she simply watched, the quiet strength of him making the air feel warmer. Then a twig cracked under her boot. He turned. Surprise flickered across his face, replaced quickly by calm. "You came," he said. She lifted the cloth-wrapped bundle in her hands. "I brought bread." He set the axe aside, stepping toward her. "You shouldn't be here." "I heard that already." She smiled faintly, though it trembled. But I thought you might need breakfast. He nodded once, gesturing toward the cabin. Come inside before the wind steals your breath. The warmth hit her as soon as the door closed. The cabin smelled of cedar and smoke. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth. Everything was simple. Wooden table, single chair, a worn blanket folded neatly at the foot of a bed built from logs. She placed the bread on the table and unwrapped it, the crust still warm from the morning's oven. You built this yourself? She asked. He nodded. Every beam. It's beautiful. He shrugged. It's quiet. She poured tea from a tin pot hanging near the fire, her hands steady now. They sat across from each other, the bread between them. For a while, they ate without speaking. The silence was not heavy. It was the kind that felt shared. Finally, she said, "The town's already talking." I know. You don't seem surprised. They've always talked. She looked down at her cup. But it's worse for you now, because of me. He leaned back, watching her. You think I haven't been worse off? I don't want to make your life harder. He smiled slightly, the kind of smile that comes from remembering pain too long to fear it. They can't take what I don't give. The simplicity of it made her ache. I wish I believed that. He tilted his head. Then borrow it. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines. Inside, the firelight trembled against the walls. She realized how close they sat, how his calm seemed to reach across the table, steadying her breath. For a moment, she forgot what she'd come to say, that she had planned to thank him, to leave, to go back to pretending none of it mattered. Instead, she asked quietly, "Why did you help me?" He stared into the flames. Because you looked like someone who needed to remember she was still alive. Her throat tightened. And what do you see now? He met her gaze, slow and deliberate. Someone who hasn't decided yet. Before she could answer, a shadow darkened the doorway. Sheriff Wade stood there, snow crusting his boots, his gloved hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. I thought I might find you here, he drawled. Marietta rose instinctively, the blood draining from her face. Sheriff. He tipped his hat. Miss Cole. Funny thing, folks seen you walk up the ridge this morning. You planning to stay a while? Talon didn't move. You're trespassing. Wade smirked. I'm enforcing decency. You of all people should know what that means. His gaze shifted to Marietta. You understand what people say, don't you? Alone up here with him. She drew herself upright, trembling but unyielding. They're already saying it. He chuckled, mean and quiet. You keep this up, and you'll have no name left to ruin. Talon stepped forward. Enough. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun. Careful, Greyhawk. The air froze. The fire popped once. Marietta felt her breath lodge in her chest. Then Talon spoke, his voice calm but edged with warning. You came here for trouble. Leave before you find it. For a long heartbeat, Wade stared him down. Then, seeing something in Talon's stillness that unsettled him, he spat into the snow and turned. You'll regret this, he muttered, and vanished into the blinding white. The silence that followed was thick and alive. Marietta pressed her palms to her temples. He'll come back. Talon nodded. Then let him. You can't fight them all. I don't need to. I just need to stand. She turned toward him, tears bright in her eyes. Why? Why not just leave? You could go anywhere. He looked past her, out the small window where the river cut through the snow. Because running teaches a man nothing. And this, he gestured vaguely between them. This is the first time in years I haven't wanted to. The confession hung in the air like breath in winter. She didn't know how to answer it. The fire cracked, the river whispered outside. For the first time, she saw not the outcast the town described, but a man anchored by quiet strength, made gentler by solitude. She moved toward the door. I should go. He followed, opening it for her. The wind struck like a warning. Marietta, he said, her name sounding strange and sacred in his voice. You don't have to be afraid. She looked back at him, snow spinning between them like dust caught in sunlight. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I'm afraid of what I'm starting to hope for." He said nothing. The silence between them carried more truth than any promise. She stepped out into the cold, the sound of her boots fading down the path. Behind her, the cabin door shut softly. The wind howled, erasing her footprints almost as soon as she made them. But one stayed, frozen deep in the drift, a mark too heavy for the snow to swallow. By the time she reached town, the church bell was tolling noon. The streets were alive again, and so were the whispers. Agnes looked up from her porch, eyes wide with worry. "You've stirred a hornet's nest, girl," she whispered. "The sheriff says he's bringing a warrant. They mean to drive him out." Marietta stopped in the street, her breath clouding in front of her. Around her, people turned to stare. Shame rose like heat under her cloak, but beneath it, another feeling burned brighter, resolve. She thought of Talon standing silent by the fire, refusing to bow to hatred. She thought of his words, "I just need to stand." When she finally spoke, her voice carried, soft but steady. "Then maybe it's time someone else stood with him." The townsfolk watched as she walked on, head high, snow swirling around her like a crown. Above the rooftops, storm clouds were gathering again, dark and full of promise. Far off on the ridge, a single column of smoke still rose into the bruised sky, curling like a signal. And somewhere inside her, beneath fear and ruin, something unbroken began to stir. A quiet vow that this time, she would not let the storm decide who she was. The blizzard came without warning, swallowing the valley in a fury of white. By dusk, roofs disappeared under drifts, the streets vanished, and even the church bell seemed muffled by the wind's wild roar. Marietta pressed against her window, the candlelight trembling beside her. Each gust rattled the glass like a warning. The town was shuttered, silent, except for the shadows moving through the snow toward the ridge. She recognized the sheriff's heavy coat among them. 3 men. Lanterns. Rifles. Her breath caught. "They're going after him." Agnes's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "They mean to drive him out." She grabbed her cloak, pulling it tight, her fingers numb before she'd even reached the latch. The cold struck her like a slap when she stepped outside, but she didn't stop. She could not. The storm pulled at her hair, tore at her shawl, bit through her boots, but she followed the wavering lantern light up the ridge, every step slower, heavier. At the river bend, she stumbled and fell to her knees. The snow was nearly waist-deep, but she pushed herself up, gasping clouds of frozen air. She could hear voices now, carried by the wind, angry, half-swallowed. "You were warned, Greyhawk. We don't need your kind hiding out here." The wind howled. Then, a gunshot cracked the night. Marietta's scream was torn away by the storm. She ran, tripping, slipping, until the cabin came into view, a dim glow flickering behind its frost-blurred window. 2 men stood outside, rifles raised. The sheriff was at the door, shouting, "Come out, Apache. We ain't asking twice." Another shot split the dark, striking the doorframe. Splinters flew. Then the door opened, slow and deliberate. Talon stepped into the blizzard, tall, bareheaded, unarmed. The snow whipped around him, catching in his dark hair, on his bare chest gleaming faintly in the lantern light. His voice was steady, low, carried somehow through the wind. "No man wins by spilling more blood. You'll find no fight here." The sheriff sneered. "You don't get to decide that." Marietta burst from the trees before he could fire again, her cloak streaming behind her. "Stop!" she cried, stumbling between them. "Please don't." The sheriff turned, startled. "Marietta? Get back!" She shook her head, breathless, her hair plastered with snow. "If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me too." He stepped forward, hand trembling on his gun. "You don't know what you're doing." "Yes, I do," she said. "For once I do." The storm screamed between them, snow swirling so thick they were half blind. Talon reached her, one arm steadying her against the wind. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured. "I couldn't stay," she whispered back. "They'd have killed you." He looked down at her, At the wild fear in her eyes, the way her lips trembled but her chin did not lower, and for a heartbeat the storm seemed to pause. The sheriff raised his gun again. "Step aside, girl." Talon moved, placing himself in front of her. "Do it," he said quietly. "You'll only prove me right." The sheriff hesitated. The men beside him shifted uneasily. The storm wailed, lanterns flickering. Then thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from the mountains, a low groan of ice breaking loose somewhere above the ridge. The sheriff's horse reared in panic. The lantern fell, shattering in the snow. For a moment, chaos erupted. Flames licking up from the spilled oil, light strobing against the storm's fury. One man fired blindly. The shot went wide, biting into the frozen earth. Talon grabbed Marietta, pulling her toward the cabin. Inside, the wind howled through the broken door. The fire in the hearth was dying. He pressed his shoulder against the wood, holding it shut. Outside, the shouts faded beneath the blizzard's roar. She sank to the floor, chest heaving. "They'll come back." He looked down at her, snow melting in rivulets across his skin. "Then let them come." "You'll die for this," she said. His voice softened. "Some things are worth dying for." Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't say that." He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You should have never carried their shame. You're braver than them all." A sound broke through the storm, the creak of footsteps outside closer. He rose, grabbing the old rifle from the wall. "Stay behind me." The door shuddered once, twice, then burst open. The sheriff stumbled in, face pale, eyes wild. "You think you can hide, Greyhawk? The law." Talon's voice cut through him. "The law of men ends where cruelty begins." The sheriff lifted his pistol, hand shaking. Marietta screamed, lunging forward. The gun fired, once, then fell silent. Smoke curled in the dim light. The sheriff froze, staring at his own hand. The bullet had struck the doorframe, inches from Talon's head. Slowly, his arm dropped. The fight drained out of him all at once. Talon didn't move. "Go," he said, "before the storm buries you too." The sheriff looked at Marietta, shame flickering like a dying ember. Then he turned and vanished into the white. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moaned through the gap in the door, scattering ashes across the floor. Marietta reached for Talon's hand. It was trembling, though his face was still calm. "He'll tell them," she whispered. "Let him. What if they come back with more?" He looked out into the storm, where the horizon had disappeared. "Then we face them together." Something in his tone, steady, final, broke the last of her fear. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing his wrist. "You're bleeding," she said softly. "It's nothing." But she tore a strip from her cloak and pressed it to his arm anyway, her hands steady despite the trembling world. He watched her in silence, snow melting in his hair. When she finished, she didn't step back. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind lowering from a scream to a sigh. The fire caught again, weak but alive. She lifted her gaze to his. Was it still pretend? He smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the fire's glow. It never was. For a long moment, there was only the sound of snow slipping from the roof, the hush that follows survival. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, feeling the slow, solid rhythm of his heart. The storm outside faded to a whisper. Dawn crept pale and soft across the ridge, painting the snow in rose and gold. By morning, the town would wake to silence and rumors. Some would swear they'd seen fire on the ridge. Others would say they'd heard her voice carried on the wind, defying them all. But up here, truth needed no witnesses. It breathed quietly between them, born of a single night's lie that became something eternal. Marietta looked toward the river, where the ice had cracked open, water glimmering beneath. "You think they'll ever forgive us?" she asked. Talon's hand closed around hers. "Forgiveness is a small thing," he said. "Let them learn respect instead." The light brightened, the first warmth of morning touching their faces. She smiled, tears freezing on her lashes. If you ever walk those hills when winter turns to spring, you can still find two sets of footprints leading toward the river, half buried, half immortal. Proof that some storms don't break people, they remake them. And somewhere between the wind and the thaw, you might still hear her voice whisper, soft and certain. It was never pretend.